Hello, I'm Jack Blanchard.
And I'm Myah Ward. It is Tuesday, July 1st.
And this is the Playbook Podcast, and it's the start of July. And as you can hear, Dasha Burns is still away in Aspen, lucky thing in the mountains. And we have a new voice on the podcast this morning, Myah Ward, our White House immigration reporter. Myah, thanks so much for coming on.
It's good to be here.
It's great to have you, and especially on a day when we're going to be talking a lot about immigration. So it's going to be brilliant to have your expertise. The big story from Donald Trump's movements today are that he is headed to South Florida to visit the new migrant detention camp that is being set up there, known as Alligator Alcatraz. And we are going to get into that in a minute on the podcast, Myah, because that is an absolutely fascinating and controversial scheme that is being set up there. Obviously, the big headline that everyone's going to be talking about this morning is the progress of the big, beautiful bill through Congress. We're a bit stymied to talk about that on this podcast because as we're recording this very, very early in the morning, the bill is still making its progress. And by the time you guys hear this, what we say will be out of date. So your best bet for the latest on the big, beautiful bill is to turn to the Playbook newsletter, which, as you all know, comes out at 6 a.m. and we'll have the latest on that. The third headline, just to keep your eye on today, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell is speaking in public at 8:30 this morning. And that's interesting because he, once again, is coming under huge pressure from the president about his refusal to lower interest rates. And so we'll be watching what he says about tariffs and about interest rates avidly. Myah, before we get on to immigration stuff, the one aspect of the sort of shenanigans that we've seen in the Senate over the last few days that I would love to talk to you about is what's happening in North Carolina, because rather brilliantly, as well as an expert on politics and immigration, you're literally from North Carolina. So we could talk a little bit about that. Were you surprised to see Thomas Tillis announce he won't be running again at the weekend?
Yeah, I mean, it was surprising. And it's always a good day when I get to talk about North Carolina. So he has kind of emerged as this figure. I mean, we saw that floor speech he gave on Medicaid is really standing up to Trump. Folks I talked to yesterday, their sense was that this was a decision he made before he actually decided to vote against advancing the bill, that he had this in mind.
He was already thinking he wouldn't run again in 26.
Right. And now it's just kind of thrown us into this situation where it's like, who's going to replace Tom Tillis? And all the chatter right now is about Laura Trump, of course. And it was so interesting. I was looking back at the headlines from 4 years ago to this month, and she was here making the same decision again. You know, Trump wanted her to run. He said, take the leap. But ultimately at the time, you know, she had a 1 and a 3-year-old family is very important to her. And she decided, you know, it was going to be too difficult to be away from her kids at that age, and basically said, you know, now is not the right time, but I'm not saying no forever. And so now here we are again, and she's facing the same dilemma. You know, Trump, White House officials, they want her to run. We know senators are already calling her. And she's built this brand from RNC chair to having her own show on Fox News. And she's making a lot of money in the podcast world and everything else. The reality, though, is her kids are still young, and everyone we've talked to said that's going to be a big deciding factor for her.
I mean, she would have the whole weight of the Trump machine and family and Fox News and everything behind her, right, if she did decide to do it. So she'd be a pretty formidable opponent for anyone, both in a primary or indeed at the election.
Yeah, she's going to 100% have the backing of MAGA world. In fact, everyone we talked to said the field right now is essentially frozen until she makes this call, because you can't fundraise. You can't call and ask Trump, what is his opinion, or would he consider endorsing you when his daughter-in-law is his number one choice? And
he said, to be clear, he still would like her to do it, presumably, if she's up for it.
Right. Mm-hmm. And some Republicans already asking, like, is she too MAGA for North Carolina? Right now, I think that answer is no. But does that look different in a couple of years? Are Democrats going to be in a place where they can run the race as kind of a referendum on Trump's presidency? And does that make it more difficult for her being a Trump if she's running against a candidate like former Democratic Governor Roy Cooper, if he decides to run?
And that's the other big question in this. I mean, they're the sort of two big hitters who are sort of scoping each other out at the moment and circling, right? Because he's won elections before in a purple state, which is a good starting point for him to be coming from. You tell me, but it appears to be remembered fondly and thought of fondly. And there's certainly plenty of Democrats who I've spoken to who would really love him to dive into this and take it on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's saying he'll make that decision. His team is saying that they will decide that by end of summer. I think there's an interesting question of timeline for Laura Trump. Someone told me today sooner rather than later, but does that mean end of summer? Does it mean fall? Sure, she has some runway to decide, but how quickly, if she doesn't want to, do they want to be able to open up that field and get a candidate in there that President Trump wants to see?
Absolutely fascinating, though, that this process of the big, beautiful bill, if that was the thing that tipped him over the edge, has suddenly brought this seat much more into play than people might have thought it would have been a few months ago. And I mean, I'd kind of written the Senate race off for the Democrats in my head, but just makes that seem a little bit more up for grabs maybe than it did a little while ago. Let's talk about immigration, because that's your area of expertise, and that is what the President of the United States wants to be talking about today, as he does on many days. He is headed to South Florida to the opening of a detention camp that has captured lots and lots of headlines, Myah, for a number of reasons. One big reason is because they've given it this slightly ridiculous, but actually quite serious in a way, nickname of Alligator Alcatraz, which is obviously the sort of thing that makes media people like to talk and write about it. But it's a really serious issue, this. Can you give us just a quick outline of what this place is and what they're expecting it to do for listeners that aren't quite plugged into this story yet?
Yeah, so it's essentially this makeshift prison camp in the Florida Everglades. It's remote and isolated and really being quickly built up at this airport. Florida officials and the White House are saying it can support thousands of beds, and they're working closely with the Trump administration and have moved really quickly to basically put up these heavy-duty tents and trailers and temporary buildings that will hold migrants. And they're describing it as this cost-effective, efficient way to carry out Trump's deportation agenda. And now Trump is going to tour it later this morning. I was at the press briefing yesterday, and Caroline Leavitt kicked it off with talking about Trump's trip to see it. And she basically said there's one road leading in, there's one leading out, and that's going to be this one-way flight out for migrants out of the country. And then she made a point to say it's isolated, and she said something essentially like it's surrounded by dangerous wildlife and terrain, and, was using all these phrases that really kind of dialed up the fear aspect.
I totally agree. Listening to the way they've talked about it, it seems like sort of punishment or fear of punishment is part of the point of this. It's not just any old facility to hold undocumented migrants while they're being processed. This is essentially it's a camp, right? They're tents in the middle of the Everglades, in the middle of the summer. It's hard to believe that in the week or two that they've been constructing this place, they've put in wonderful air conditioning and fabulous medical facilities. And so you do wonder what the sort of conditions are going to be like for these people. But they appear to be leaning into that. That's the thing that's really striking when what I've read about it. They're not sort of saying, don't worry, we've got the best medical equipment in the land, it's going to be fine. They're saying, yeah, it's going to be awful. That's the impression they want to give. What's the thinking behind that?
Everything they do, to me, connects back to a couple of things on the immigration front. One, Trump's promise to deport millions of undocumented immigrants and to begin this operation the day he stepped foot in the White House. That was never going to happen and was never going to happen that quickly because of so many factors and challenges that we really don't have time to get into right now. And so what he has to do is find other ways to show progress and to show toughness on immigration, to show that he's taking these actions to crack down on what he says are the worst of the worst, even though we know from the numbers and the stories that many of the people they are going after and deporting, they're not necessarily violent criminals.
Or even criminals at all.
Correct. And we've seen this PR campaign continuous in a number of ways from the White House, whether it's the mugshots they like to highlight. I mean, just take a look at their social media feed. Trump is building this narrative, continuing to make immigration about public safety and fear. And you kind of got at this earlier, but it's also this deterrent strategy, right? They believe that this kind of messaging and the visuals that we're going to see today, that's going to keep people from coming to the country. He's been very successful in having these border numbers down. They believe that works, but they also want people to self-deport. They want people to be scared of being sent to Alligator Alcatraz and deciding to leave the country on their own, or being scared to be sent to Guantanamo Bay or to a prison in El Salvador. All of these things are connected, and we continue to see this strategy over and over again.
The thing that's always struck me about these kinds of projects, and I felt a bit the same when Trump was sending the military into Los Angeles a few weeks ago, is that what politicians sometimes like to do is create a big political dividing line and push a policy really to the quite extreme so that you force your opponent to be on the other side of it. Well, I can't defend this. They're going to go against it. And then they're able to say, look, there they are again. The Democrats, they're the party of open borders. They're against this. We're doing everything we can to get immigration down, which is what people wanted. And once again, they're on the other side. And it feels like they're just sometimes looking for something even more extreme because they know the Democrats don't want to talk about this stuff. And it sort of forces them to come out against it. And then you create that dividing line and then you hammer them for being on the wrong side of the argument as they would see it.
Yeah, I mean, Trump's White House, his aides and allies, they welcome these fights. They welcome Democrats interrupting press conferences or getting arrested. They see Trump as on the winning side of this argument and that he won in large part because of immigration and he has a mandate to act on that. And we're seeing that play out on the Democratic side. We've seen pushback here and there on a number of issues. They've had their moments where they've kind of stood up to this. But I mean, oh my gosh, how different does it feel than 4 years ago? You know, it's not this consistent drumbeat or outcry that we remember from then because, I mean, Democrats are scared of this issue still. You know, they're trying to sort through what is their message going to be because we know that President Joe Biden, he got trapped with that and his indecisiveness over 4 years, the mixed messaging from the White House, like that didn't work out so well. And so right now they're trying to figure out what does that message look like? How do we get on the same page? How do we not go too far left? And I think Democrats are still a little bit scared of that and trying to navigate how they're going to go forward.
We generally try and finish the show with something a little bit more lighthearted. I think this is lighthearted. It's definitely made me laugh. This president, as we know, is a unique character in numerous ways, Myah. He's definitely the first president of the United States that I can remember who goes onto his own social media stream and announces the launch of his own perfume, as happened last night. Listen to this, Truth Social. From the President of the United States of America, Trump fragrances are here. They're called Victory 4547 because they're all about winning. And he's literally selling his own perfume and they're for men and women. Get yourself a bottle and don't forget to get one for your loved ones too. Will you be investing in some Victory 4547 perfume, do you think, Myah?
I mean, I am very curious, like the scent. What does it smell like? Didn't he say it's like strength or something? Like, what does that smell like?
Victory, man. It smells like victory. Come on. It's like napalm.
I mean, I will say I've lost track of the number of different things. He's in so many different markets now. And I keep thinking like, this is it. And then I did not have perfume on my bingo card last night.
On your bingo card. Who knows what's next? Myah, thank you so much. That was great. Thank you all for listening. That's all we got time for on today's show. We do have much more news and analysis in today's Playbook newsletter, including the latest on the big, beautiful bill. You can find that at politico.com/playbook. And we'll be back tomorrow. Have a great Tuesday.